The door slammed open so hard it cracked against the wall, and every single person in that office froze. Park Jae-won stood in the middle of the room, his tailored black suit immaculate, his jaw tight, his dark eyes scanning the floor like a predator who had just caught the scent of blood. Behind him, two men in equally dark suits stood with their hands clasped, their faces completely expressionless. The kind of expressionless that made grown men want to take 3 steps back. Nobody breathed. Nobody, except for the woman being dragged toward the exit by security, the woman with tears streaming silently down her face, a cardboard box pressed against her chest, her braids slightly disheveled, her dignity barely hanging on by a thread. Amara Osebonsu did not look up. She couldn't. If she looked up, she would fall apart completely, and she had promised herself she would not give these people that satisfaction. Not today. Not ever. She was almost at the elevator when she heard it. Let her go. 2 words. Quiet. Dangerously quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded a storm. The security guard holding her arms stopped moving instantly, like someone had cut his power supply. Amara's heart hammered so hard she felt it in her throat. She knew that voice. She knew it better than she knew her own heartbeat. She finally looked up. And the entire office watched as Park Jae-won, Chairman Park Jae-won, the man the Korean financial world called the ghost because nobody ever saw him coming until it was already too late, walked directly toward her with an expression on his face that nobody in that building had ever seen before. It was the expression of a man who was done pretending. "Jay," she started. "Don't," he said softly, reaching her. He took the cardboard box from her hands and passed it to one of his men without looking away from her face. Then, with a gentleness that was completely at odds with every terrifying thing about him, he reached up and tucked a loose braid behind her ear. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. He turned around slowly, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Who," he said, his voice perfectly calm, "gave the order to remove my wife from this building?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. Now, if you are new here, welcome to AfroKorean narrative, where love hits different, betrayal cuts deep, and the drama never, ever stops. Make sure you hit that subscribe button right now because this story is going to shake you from beginning to end. Let's go back to where it all began. 6 months earlier, Amara Osebonsu arrived in Seoul with 2 suitcases, a master's degree in marketing, and absolutely no idea what she was walking into. She was 27, Ghanaian, fiercely intelligent, and perpetually underestimated, which she had learned to use as a weapon a long time ago. She had grown up watching her mother work 3 jobs to keep their family of 5 afloat back in Accra, and she had promised herself that she would build something solid, something real, something that could not be taken away. The position at CN Group's marketing division was not glamorous. Junior associate, 3rd floor, the kind of role where you did most of the work and attended none of the credit. But it was a foot in the door of one of South Korea's most powerful conglomerates, and Amara was not above starting small. What she had not anticipated was Kim Soo-jin. Kim Soo-jin was everything Amara was not, at least on the surface. She was the daughter of one of CN Group's senior board members, she had gone to the right schools, she had the right friends, she had the right face for the office politics that kept corporate souls spinning. She was also, as Amara discovered within her first week, spectacularly cruel in the way that only truly insecure people can manage. "Your Korean is actually not terrible," Soo-jin said to her on her 3rd day, in a tone that made the compliment feel like a slap. "For a foreigner." Amara had looked at her very calmly. "Thank you. Your English is also passable." Soo-jin had not forgiven her for that. From that moment, there was a war, even if only one side was officially fighting it. Soo-jin recruited allies the way some people collected shoes, enthusiastically and with great attention to which ones could do the most damage. There was Oh Hyun-tae, her boyfriend of 3 years, who was as handsome as he was hollow. There was Lee Min-ji, Soo-jin's best friend, who laughed too loudly at things that were not funny, especially when those things were directed at Amara. And there was a rotating cast of junior staff who simply did not want to end up on Soo-jin's bad side, which meant they were, by default, on Amara's. But Amara had not come to Seoul to make friends. She had come to work. And work she did. She was the first one in every morning and often the last one out. She learned the company's client portfolio with the dedication of someone studying for a medical exam. She spotted a flaw in their Southeast Asian campaign strategy within her first month and wrote a report about it that her direct supervisor, Manager Cho, submitted upward without her name on it. She found out 3 weeks later that Manager Cho had received a commendation for the idea. She filed it away. She did not make a scene. She simply started keeping copies of everything. What nobody in the office knew, what nobody could have possibly known, was that Amara had not come to Seoul entirely alone. She had come with a secret. Park Jae-won had not planned to fall in love. In his world, love was a liability, a crack in the armor that enemies could push a blade through. He was 34 years old, and he had spent the better part of those years building, protecting, and expanding the Park family's empire, both the legitimate corporation that appeared in Forbes and the other operation that did not appear anywhere at all. The Park family controlled 3 things in South Korea with an iron grip that had never once been successfully challenged: logistics, which meant nothing moved in or out of the port without their knowledge; finance, which meant they had quiet stakes in more companies than most people could count; and information, which was the most valuable currency in any world, legal or otherwise. Jae-won was the eldest son and the current chairman, which meant he was the face, the brain, and the sword of all of it simultaneously. He was also, as his younger brother Jae-hyun frequently pointed out with great amusement, completely terrifying to literally everyone except their grandmother. He had met Amara at a conference in Singapore, 8 months before she ever set foot in Seoul. She had been there representing her previous employer, a mid-sized Ghanaian marketing firm, pitching to a panel that included him. He had not been supposed to be there that day. A last-minute cancellation by one of his directors had put him in that room almost by accident. She had walked in, looked at the panel of 7 men, all older, all Korean, all wearing the particular expression of people who had already decided not to be impressed, and she had set her presentation materials down, looked directly at Jae-won, and said, "I know some of you have already made up your minds. I'm here to change them." He had not been able to look away from her for the entire 40 minutes. She did not get the contract. The decision had already been made before she walked in, exactly as she had suspected. But she had made her case with such precision and fire that Jae-won had found himself rewriting his assumptions about what persuasion actually looked like. He had sent a car for her that evening. She had sent it back. He had gone himself. She had opened the hotel restaurant door, looked at him standing there in a suit that probably cost more than some people's cars, and said, "You have 10 minutes to explain why I should have dinner with someone who just let a rigged panel waste my time." He had laughed. Actually laughed. He could not remember the last time that had happened. They had dinner for 4 hours. What followed was 4 months of something that neither of them had a clean word for, calls it impossible hours because of time zones, weekends when he flew to Accra or she flew to Seoul, conversations that ran from business to childhood memories to the kind of late-night honesty that only happens when 2 people stop performing for each other. He told her things about himself in careful increments, testing the water, watching how she received each truth. She was not easily shaken. She asked smart questions. She did not pretend the darker parts of his world did not exist, but she also did not run. He had proposed at a small restaurant in Accra that his security team had spent 2 weeks quietly vetting. No cameras, no announcement, no performance. Just the 2 of them in a ring that had belonged to his mother. She had said yes, but with conditions. "I don't want to be the chairman's wife who sits at events and smiles," she said. "I have a career. I have a plan. I need you to let me build it myself." "I would never take that from you," he said. "I also need time," she said. "Before we go public. Before your world collides with mine professionally. I want to know I can stand on my own in your country before everyone knows whose wife I am. I don't want people to think everything I have is because of you." He understood that better than she knew. They were married quietly, privately, in a small ceremony with only his brother and her sister as witnesses. They kept a shared apartment in Seoul that almost nobody knew about. Publicly, they existed in completely separate orbits. And then she applied for a position at CN Group's marketing division. He had not been happy about it. CN Group, he said carefully, when she told him. I know there's history between your family and theirs. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. Jae-won, I got this interview on my own. My portfolio, my qualifications. I need to do this. He had looked at her for a long time. Then, if anything happens to you in that building, I will burn it down. You will do nothing of the sort, she said. You will let me handle my own battles. And if your battles become too big? She had smiled at him then, the smile he had never been able to refuse. Then you can be my last resort. He had agreed. He had also, without telling her, placed 2 of his people in the company's lower floors, because some promises he simply was not capable of keeping. By her 3rd month at CN Group, Amara had identified 3 things clearly. First, the company's digital marketing strategy was hemorrhaging potential revenue in ways that nobody on the team wanted to admit. Second, Manager Cho was going to keep taking credit for her work until she forced the issue. And third, Kim Soo-jin's campaign against her was escalating in ways that were beginning to become genuinely dangerous to her career. It started with small things. Files that went missing from her desk. Emails that were never forwarded. A client presentation she had prepared that somehow arrived with 3 slides corrupted. She could not prove any of it, but she knew. She always knew. Then came the day Soo-jin pulled something that crossed a very different kind of line. There was a client dinner. CN Group was attempting to onboard a major Nigerian fashion conglomerate, and Amara had been the one to build the relationship with their representative, a warm, sharp woman named Folake Adeyemi, over weeks of careful communication. The dinner was supposed to be Amara's moment to present the partnership proposal she had spent 3 weeks crafting. She arrived at the restaurant and found that Soo-jin had not only taken her seat at the table but had replaced half of Amara's presentation with her own version, a version that, to Amara's sharp eye, fundamentally misunderstood what the Nigerian company was actually looking for. Amara stood at the door of that private dining room for exactly 5 seconds, processing what she was seeing. Folake Adeyemi caught her eye from across the table and raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. Amara walked in, apologized smoothly for her lateness, found the nearest empty chair, and spent the next 2 hours systematically and very professionally dismantling every wrong assumption in Soo-jin's presentation while rebuilding her own case with the skill of someone who had been preparing for exactly this kind of ambush. By the end of the dinner, Folake Adeyemi had requested that Amara personally oversee the partnership if CN Group was to move forward. Soo-jin's smile for the rest of the evening looked like something carved onto a mask. Amara went home that night, sat in the apartment she shared with her husband, and let herself be furious for exactly 20 minutes. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work. Jae-won had watched her from the kitchen doorway, his arms folded, reading her the way he read everything, quietly, completely. Talk to me, he said. She told him. All of it. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she loved most about him. The way he gave her his full attention like it was a resource he was deliberately allocating. When she finished, he said, give me her full name. No. Amara. I said no, Jae-won. This is my fight. He was quiet for a moment. There is a limit to how long I will watch someone hurt you and call it your fight. We agreed. We agreed, he repeated. Yes, we did. He came and sat beside her and took her hand. But the agreement has conditions. I know. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I'm not at the limit yet. I will decide when the limit is reached, he said quietly. She laughed a little despite herself. That's not how it works. In this one specific area, he said, that is exactly how it works. She did not argue further, because she knew him well enough to know that some negotiations were already decided before they began. The campaign that pushed everything over the edge came in the 5th month. Soo-jin, whose father was now actively pressuring the board for a departmental restructuring that would effectively elevate her into a senior position, decided that she needed to remove Amara from the board's attention permanently. Not quietly. Publicly. She fabricated a complaint. It was sophisticated, which Amara gave her a grim kind of credit for. There were doctored email records, supposedly showing that Amara had been sharing confidential client information with a competing firm. There were two colleagues, Lee Min-ji and a man named Park Jae-won, who had apparently been promised a promotion in exchange for his cooperation, who were prepared to corroborate the story. There was a formal HR complaint filed under multiple names, all saying variations of the same thing. The HR director, a colorless man named Yang Suk-ho who had been quietly in Kim Soo-jin's father's pocket for 2 years, moved with unusual speed. Before Amara had been given a formal chance to respond, before any independent review had been commissioned, the decision came down from the upper floor. Termination, effective immediately, on grounds of breach of confidentiality and professional misconduct. Amara was called into Yang Suk-ho's office on a Tuesday morning and told to clear her desk. She sat in that chair and looked at the termination letter and felt the blood drain from her face. Not from fear. From a cold, searing fury that she kept perfectly locked behind her expression. She asked for the specific evidence. She was told that the investigation had concluded. She asked who had signed off on the decision. Yang Suk-ho shifted in his chair and looked just slightly to the left of her face. She stood up. She collected her things. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She walked out of his office, went to her desk, began to put her belongings in a box with steady hands, and pulled out her phone. She did not call Jae-won. She called her sister instead, for exactly 4 minutes, speaking in Chui, low and fast. Her sister had law credentials. She would need documentation advice. It was Lee Min-ji who made the call that changed everything. Min-ji, drunk on the victory of watching Amara pack her box, leaned against the desk of a colleague and made a comment that she did not think anyone important would hear. Finally, she said, with a bright, vicious little laugh. The African princess is leaving. Maybe now she can go back to wherever she came from. There was a moment of ugly, uncomfortable laughter from the people nearby. What Lee Min-ji did not know was that one of those colleagues, a quiet young man named Young Taeyong who was supposed to be invisible in his role, was not actually a junior data analyst. He was one of Jae-won's people. And he had been watching and recording everything in that office for 3 months. He stepped away from his desk, walked calmly to the stairwell, and made a call. The call lasted 45 seconds. 12 minutes later, a convoy of black vehicles pulled up outside CN Group's building. Park Jae-won had been in a board meeting when his phone vibrated with a message from Taeyong. He read it once. His expression did not change. He stood up from the table, buttoned his jacket, and said to the room, "We'll reschedule," in a tone that made absolutely no one at that table consider questioning it. His brother Jae-hyun, who had been sitting 3 seats down, read the look on his face and was on his feet in 2 seconds. What happened? Get the car. Jae-won. Now, Jae-hyun. They were moving before the elevator reached the ground floor. In the car, Jae-won's second-in-command, a lean, sharp-faced man named Ryu Sung-min, pulled up the documentation Taeyong had been quietly compiling. The fabricated emails. The witness coaching. The HR director's communications with Kim Soo-jin's father. It was all there, methodical and damning. Jae-won looked at it in silence. His hands, resting on his knees, were completely still. That stillness was something everyone who knew him had learned to be afraid of. The loud version of Jae-won was manageable. The quiet version was not. The Kim family, he said softly, has been making decisions as though they have no ceiling. Ryu Sung-min did not respond, because it was not a question. Pull everything we have on CN Group's board structure, Jae-won said. And find out what Kim Dae-ho's actual stake positions look like right now. Already running it. Jae-won looked out the window. His jaw was tight enough to cut glass. Nobody, he said quietly, to no one in particular, touches what is mine. When he walked into that office and said, "Let her go," the security guard released Amara's arms so fast it was almost comical. Jae-won took the box from her. He checked her face, her arms, the redness at her wrist where the guard had been gripping. His eyes went flat and very dark when he saw it. Jae-won, she said again, quietly. I'm okay. You are, he agreed, in a way that implied several other people in the room would not be for long. He turned to face the room. Everyone was standing or frozen in place. Soo-jin, near the back, had gone the color of paper. Min-ji was gripping the edge of her desk. Yang Suk-ho, who had appeared from somewhere, was opening and closing his mouth like a fish who had suddenly found himself with a very large problem. I'm Chairman Park, Jae-won said, to no one specifically and to everyone completely. Of Park Holdings. I believe most of you know what that means. He paused, letting it settle. The woman you just had escorted out of this building is my wife. And before any of you recalibrate your understanding of that sentence, let me be very clear about what happens next. He reached into his jacket and removed a folded document, which he handed to Ryu Sung-min, who walked it to Yang Suk-ho. That, Jae-won said, is a notification of a full legal and financial audit of CN Group's fourth-floor HR operations, commissioned under the Park Holdings compliance partnership with your parent company's creditors. It was filed this morning. He tilted his head slightly. We have been thorough. Yang Suk-ho looked at the document and seemed to shrink by about 3 inches. Additionally, Jae-won continued, the fabricated evidence used to terminate my wife's contract has been flagged and preserved, along with communications that establish who fabricated it and who was paid to support it. That documentation is currently with our legal team and will be with the relevant labor tribunal by end of business today. The silence in the room was absolute. Soo-jin took one step backward and bumped into a desk. Kim Soo-jin, Jae-won said, and the way he said her name made her go rigid. He looked at her directly. Your father built his position in this company on relationships. I would suggest he have a conversation with you about the relationship he no longer has with Park Holdings, effective as of 40 minutes ago. He paused. I do not forgive. I do not negotiate on this. I simply remove the problem. If you are still watching, I know you are as shaken as I am right now. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in Amara's position. And if you have not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This story is not even close to over. Amara stood through all of it, watching her husband dismantle the people who had hurt her with the same calm precision with which he did everything. She had known, intellectually, who he was. She had known the weight he carried, the power he wielded. But there was something different about seeing it directed in her defense. Something that moved through her chest like a wave she had not braced for. She also noticed that he was careful. He did not touch her in a way that felt like possession. He did not speak over her or about her in a way that made her small. Everything he said positioned her as the wronged party in a professional dispute, because that was exactly what she was. He was her husband. He was also letting her keep her dignity intact, which she recognized as a specific and deliberate choice. Later, in the car, she sat beside him and watched Seoul move past the window. You could have come sooner, she said. You told me not to. I know what I told you. Then you know why I waited. He looked at her. The moment you needed me to step in, I was already moving. I did not come early because you did not want that. I came when it became about your safety, which was always the line. She was quiet for a moment. Lee Min-ji said something. I know what she said. It didn't break me. I know that too. He reached across and took her hand. That's not why I came. I came because they were trying to erase something they had no right to touch. She looked at their joined hands. His were larger, steady, the left one bearing a ring that matched hers, the one almost nobody had ever been close enough to see. What happens now? Now, he said, we stop pretending we exist in separate orbits. He looked at her. I have been patient, Amara. I have let you build your career and keep your independence, and I would do it 10 times over because that is who you are and I would never want to change it. But I am done watching you fight alone in rooms I could walk into. I was fighting fine. Spectacularly, he agreed. And from now on, you will fight spectacularly with my full weight behind you. Not in front of you. Behind you. There is a difference. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, you know I'm going to need a new job. I have 3 companies who have been trying to get your attention for 6 months. She blinked. What? He looked faintly amused. Did you think I didn't know about the headhunter who contacted you in March? Or the offer from the Jeju Media Group in April? You said you weren't tracking my professional life. I said I wasn't interfering with it. He raised an eyebrow. Knowing something is not the same as interfering. She stared at him. Park Jae-won. Yes? You are the most infuriating person I have ever met. And yet, he said mildly, here you are. She laughed despite herself, and the tension in her chest cracked open and released, and for a moment she leaned her head against his shoulder in the back of that car and let herself feel safe in a way she had been rationing carefully for months. What Amara did not know yet was that the story was far from finished. What Jae-won had not told her in the car, what he had been careful to hold back while she was still processing the events of the day, was that Kim Dae-ho, Soo-jin's father, board member, the man who had engineered the fabricated dismissal from above, had made a call of his own that afternoon. He had called someone who owed him a favor. Someone in a very specific and dangerous corner of Seoul's underworld, the part that overlapped with business empires in ways that never made it into official records. He had placed what amounted to a request for information. Who was Park Jae-won protecting, and why, and could that thing be used as leverage? It was the most miscalculated decision Kim Dae-ho had made in 20 years of carefully calculated decisions. Because the man he called was Choi Byung-il, and Choi Byung-il had exactly one standing rule about Park Jae-won. He did not come within a kilometer of Park business. That rule existed because 7 years ago, Park Jae-won had given him a choice between that rule and consequences that Choi Byung-il still did not like to think about. So when Kim Dae-ho made that call, what he actually did was deliver himself directly into the information network that Jae-won already owned. By nightfall, Ryu Sung-min had a full transcript on Jae-won's desk. Jae-won, read it. He set it down. He looked at Jae-hyun, who was sitting across from him with an expression that suggested he had already read it too. He moved against Amara professionally. Jae-won said. Yes. Jae-won was quiet for a moment. He wants to know what she means to me. That appears to be the intent. Jae-won straightened the papers on his desk with deliberate, precise movements. Then he is going to find out. Jae-hyun watched him. How bad? Jae-won stood up and reached for his jacket. Tell Sung-min to prepare the full picture on Kim Dae-ho's financial structure. Every stake, every silent partnership, every promise he has made that he cannot keep if Park Holdings decides to call in certain relationships. He paused. I want it ready by morning. And Kim Dae-ho himself? Jae-won picked up his phone and met his brother's eyes. He is going to have a very educational week. Amara woke at 2 in the morning to find the other side of the bed empty. She lay still for a moment, listening, and heard him in the study down the hall, voice low, the occasional pause that meant he was listening to someone on the other end of a call. She got up and padded to the kitchen and made tea for both of them, something she had started doing months ago without either of them ever discussing it. When she heard him finish the call, she carried both cups to the study doorway and leaned against the frame. He looked up. Something in his expression shifted, the work face dropping, the husband face arriving in its place. She had come to recognize that transition as one of the most private things about him, the fact that he made it at all. Come here, he said. She brought the tea and sat in the chair across from his desk, tucking her feet up under her. He wrapped both hands around the cup she slid toward him and watched her over the rim. Tell me, she said. It's handled. Jae-won. He looked at her for a moment. Then he set the cup down and told her. Not everything, because there were parts of his world he kept from her deliberately and she had accepted that as a condition of who he was, but enough. Kim Dae-ho had tried to use her as a lever. He was removing the lever and the hand holding it simultaneously. She listened to the whole thing. Then she said, I want to be in the room when it happens. He was quiet. I don't want to be the person being protected in the back room, she said. I want to be there. I want him to see my face. Amara. You said behind me, not ahead of me. Not a wall between me and everything. She looked at him steadily. I have been building a case of my own, Jae-won. Documentation. Evidence trail from the very beginning of Soo-jin's campaign. I have been keeping records for months. He stared at her. How many months? Since month 1. She allowed a small smile. I have been a one-woman investigation unit. She reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a USB drive, which she set on the desk between them. This is everything. Timestamps, copies, communications I kept when I realized people were trying to rewrite what had happened. The original drafts of presentations that were stolen. The email thread where Min-ji coached Yang Suk-ho on what language to use in the termination letter. Jae-won picked up the drive and looked at it. Then he looked at her. You were always ahead of them, he said quietly. I was always ahead of them, she confirmed. I just needed time to let them think they had won so they would stop being careful. The expression on his face was something she had seen only a handful of times in their marriage. It was the expression of a man who was genuinely, completely, almost undone by the person in front of him. He came around the desk and crouched in front of her chair, holding the USB drive, and looked at her face for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, You are the most extraordinary person I have ever met in my entire life. She reached out and touched his face with one hand. I know, she said. And you have very good taste. He laughed, and it was the Real laugh, the one she had first heard in a restaurant in Singapore and had never forgotten. The one that made him look younger and completely unguarded and nothing like the man that the financial press called the ghost. The meeting happened 3 days later. Kim Dae-ho had been summoned to a business luncheon at a private members club in Gangnam under the impression that it was a standard board consultation. He arrived in a good suit and his usual expression of comfortable authority, and then he walked into the room and found himself looking across a long table at Park Jae-won. And beside Park Jae-won, perfectly composed, in a deep green dress that made her absolutely impossible to ignore, was Amara. Kim Dae-ho stopped walking. Jae-won stood up. Chairman Kim. Please sit down. What is this? Kim Dae-ho said, his eyes moving from Jae-won to Amara and back again. This, Jae-won said pleasantly, is a conversation that we are having as a result of several decisions you made this week. Please sit. Kim Dae-ho sat, because Ryu Sung-min appeared at his shoulder from somewhere and the chair was simply there and it seemed like the most dignified option. Amara looked at him across the table without any expression at all. She had learned that from her husband. The absence of visible emotion as a weapon. Ryu Sung-min placed a folder in front of Kim Dae-ho. Kim Dae-ho did not open it. That folder, Jae-won said, contains 2 things. The first is a complete financial analysis of every position you hold that is in any way supported by institutions that fall within Park Holdings' sphere of influence. Which is, as it turns out, quite comprehensive. He folded his hands on the table. The second is a copy of the communications you sent to Choi Byung-il on Thursday evening. I believe you know what those communications say. Kim Dae-ho's face had gone from authoritative to gray in about 30 seconds. Your daughter, Jae-won continued, orchestrated a campaign of sustained professional harassment, document fabrication, and orchestrated dismissal against an employee of CN Group. That employee is my wife. He said it simply, without emphasis, which somehow made it more emphatic than anything else. Your HR director, who is on your payroll in several ways that CN Group's board is not aware of, executed the termination using evidence that was fabricated. We have all of it. Kim Dae-ho looked at Amara. There was something shifting in his expression, the beginning of a calculation, the consideration of whether there was still an angle. Amara spoke for the first time. Her Korean was precise and clean. I want to be clear about something, she said. I am not here because my husband brought me. I am here because I built the case that is in that folder. The documentation, the evidence trail, the record of every action your daughter and her associates took from the first week I joined CN Group. That is my work. She held his gaze. You decided I was removable. You were wrong about what that meant. Kim Dae-ho looked at her for a long moment. What do you want? He said finally, to both of them. Jae-won said, several things. First, Amara's termination is reversed, with a formal written apology from the company and the HR department to be submitted publicly within the week. Second, the colleagues who participated in the fabricated complaint are dismissed. Third, your daughter resigns from her position. Fourth, Yang Suk-ho's secondary compensation arrangement with your family is disclosed to CN Group's board. He paused. And fifth, he said, you make no further contact, directly or indirectly, with anyone within our lives. Not through business channels. Not through social circles. Not through third parties who owe you favors. There is no version of that scenario that ends well for you. Kim Dae-ho stared at the folder. And if I refuse? Then the folder goes to the labor tribunal, the financial regulators, and 3 specific journalists who have been trying to get a story about your family's board maneuvering for the last 2 years. Jae-won's voice was perfectly calm. I always give people one opportunity to choose the better ending. This is yours. The silence stretched. Kim Dae-ho opened the folder. He looked at what was inside. He turned 3 pages slowly, stopping at a specific set of financial documents, and the color drained completely from his face as he understood the scope of what he was looking at. He closed the folder. I'll need a week, he said. You have 3 days, Jae-won said. Soo-jin called Amara's number that evening. Amara almost did not pick up. Then she did, because she wanted to hear it. You could have just talked to me, Soo-jin said. Her voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it something was shaking. Amara was quiet for a moment. I tried to do that, she said. From the beginning, I tried to simply do my work and exist in that space. You chose otherwise. You came into my space. I came into a workplace, Amara said. One that belongs to no one person. One that I earned a right to be in the same as anyone else. She kept her voice even. You could have competed with me professionally. I would have respected that. What you chose to do was try to erase me. There is a difference. Silence on the other end. I didn't know, Soo-jin said finally. About who you were. About who he was. I know you didn't, Amara said. But I need you to understand something. Even if I had been exactly what you thought I was, a junior employee with no connections and no protection, it still would have been wrong. What you did would still have been wrong. She paused. That's the thing you need to sit with. She ended the call. She stood by the window for a moment, looking out at Seoul's skyline, the city that had tested her and tried to break her and had not managed either. Then she heard Jae-won come up behind her, and his arms came around her from behind, warm and steady, and he rested his chin on her head. How do you feel? He said. Like I won something, she said. But also like I'm very tired. That, he said, is what winning actually feels like. People don't tell you that. She turned in his arms and looked up at him. We're going public, she said. I'm ready. Something in his face went completely quiet in the best way, the way it did when something mattered more than he had words for. Yes, he said. We are. I want to call my mother first. Of course. And I want a proper wedding. With everyone. With food that takes 3 days to make and music and dancing. Whatever you want. Jae-won. Yes? She put both hands on his face the way she had in the study. Thank you for waiting. For letting me do it my way first. He turned his head and pressed his mouth to her palm. Thank you, he said quietly, for letting me in at all. The public announcement came 10 days later. Not a press release, not a formal statement, just a photograph that Jae-hyun took without permission and posted to his own social media with a caption that read, My brother married the most frightening woman I have ever met and I have never been more proud of him. Congratulations to them both. She absolutely runs this family now. The photograph was the two of them at the small celebration they had held the evening before, her laughing at something, him watching her laugh with the expression of a man who had stopped trying to hide anything. It was everywhere by the morning. The responses were enormous and immediate. The financial press tried to frame it as a business story. The gossip press tried to frame it as a scandal. The internet, which has its own sense of justice, largely decided that the story of a woman who had quietly built evidence against her workplace harassers while her husband waited patiently outside the building was one of the most satisfying things they had encountered in some time. CN Group issued the formal apology within the 3-day deadline. It was comprehensive and public and clearly written by people who understood that the alternative was significantly worse. Yang Suk-ho resigned. Min-ji and Park Dae-sung were dismissed. Soo-jin sent a resignation letter by email. Kim Dae-ho retired from the board 6 weeks later, citing health reasons. His financial positions unwound quietly over the following months in ways that the general public never fully connected to each other. Amara sat across from Folake Adeyemi at lunch 2 months later, and they were laughing about something that had happened during a video call that morning, and Folake said, "You know, when I saw you walk into that dinner, the night your colleague tried to steal your presentation, I thought to myself, whoever this woman is, I want to work with her for the rest of my career." "You could see what was happening?" Amara said. "Darling, I have been in boardrooms for 20 years. I can see what is happening from 40 meters away." Folake shook her head. "And I watched you handle it with more grace than I would have managed. I would have flipped the table." Amara laughed. "I thought about it." "The husband though," Folake said, raising an eyebrow. "That entrance. I saw the video someone leaked from the office security footage. The man walked in like the building belonged to him." "He behaves like everything belongs to him," Amara said dryly. "It's his most irritating quality." "Does it?" Amara was quiet for a moment. "No," she admitted. "Not when it's being directed at protecting me." Folake studied her. "You love him." "Completely," Amara said simply. "Which was terrifying before, and is less terrifying now, and is still the largest thing I carry around in my chest every day." Folake nodded, like this made perfect sense. "The good ones are like that," she said. "They don't make you smaller. They just stand behind you and make the room larger." Amara thought about that for the rest of the day. That evening, she found Jae-won in the kitchen, which was unusual, attempting to make groundnut soup from a recipe her mother had sent him as a voice note at what must have been 3 in the morning his time, which meant he had specifically called her mother to request it. The kitchen smelled like roasted peanuts and palm oil and something almost, but not quite, right. She stood in the doorway and looked at him for a moment, this man who controlled shipping lanes and financial institutions and had never in his life needed to cook anything for anyone. He was focused on the pot with the same expression he brought to board meetings, like the soup was a problem to be solved and he was not going to let it win. "Jae-won," she said. "I almost have it," he said without looking up. "You are about to burn the palm oil." "I'm not." He glanced at the pot and moved it quickly. "I had it." She came into the kitchen and stood beside him and looked at the soup and then at him. "Why are you making this?" He kept his eyes on the pot. "Your mother told me it was the thing you missed most when you were upset or tired. She said you used to sit in her kitchen when things were hard and she would make this and you would feel better." He finally glanced at her. "You have had a hard few months." The wave came back to her chest. She looked at this impossible, careful, enormous, terrifying man who had sat through 4-hour dinners in Singapore and flown across oceans and waited patiently outside battles he could have ended in minutes and was now standing in their kitchen trying to make her mother's soup from a voice note because he had called her mother to ask what would make her feel better. "Jae-won," she said, and her voice was not entirely steady. "Don't," he said. "I'm concentrating." She laughed, and it turned into something that was almost tears, and then he did look at her, and he turned the heat down on the soup and turned to face her completely, and she said, "I just want you to know that I chose you. Not because of your name or your power or any of it. I chose you specifically, the person that you are when it's just us." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said quietly. "Good. And Amara." His voice was very soft. "I chose you before I knew you would be the most formidable person in every room. I would have chosen you anyway." But I need you to know that I am. He paused in the way he sometimes did when he was choosing words carefully, the way that had always told her something mattered more than he was comfortable showing. I am proud of you. Every day. The way you fought. The way you refused to be erased. The way you walked into that lunch meeting and looked at Kim Dae-ho and said what you said. He shook his head slightly. I wanted to applaud. She stepped forward and put her arms around him and held on, her face against his chest, his arms coming around her immediately, steady and warm and entirely surrounding. The soup is going to burn, she said into his jacket. Let it burn, he said. I'll teach you properly tomorrow. I'll have your mother teach me. I'm calling her on Saturday. You are not calling my mother on Saturday. She already agreed. Park Jae-won. Mrs. Park, he corrected gently. She pulled back and looked at his face. The faint trace of amusement at the corners of his mouth. The steadiness in his eyes. The ring on his hand. All of it. Mrs. Park, she agreed. And then she reached past him and turned the heat all the way off, because she did not actually want the soup to burn, and she started giving him instructions in a mixture of Korean and Chui, and he listened with the focused attention of someone taking notes on something important, and the kitchen smelled like palm oil and roasted peanuts, and outside the Seoul skyline glittered on and on and on. If you watched this story all the way to the end, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You are exactly the kind of viewer who makes this channel worth building. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite moment from this story. Was it Amara walking into that client dinner? Was it Jae-won's entrance? Was it her USB drive moment? I need to know. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do it right now because I have so many more stories like this one waiting for you. Like this video if you felt every single emotion, and share it with someone who loves a good love story, because Amara and Jae-won deserve to be talked about everywhere. I will see you in the next one. Do not go anywhere.